welcome to the Average Outdoors channel here on this beautiful but very cold morning. Today we are going to make a knife, and I thought that I'd walk you along the entire process instead of my usual kind of montage of videos. Anyways, on a recent walk out on the woods, I actually found this really old saw blade, and as a knife maker, of course, the first thing I think to myself is, that's some good knife making steel. And I get this pleasure from turning something old, rusty, and useless into something that I think is really cool and very useful. So let's head into the shop and get started on our next build. So here's a piece of steel that I found. You can tell that it's an older saw blade. One, just the rust out here. We don't get a whole lot of rain, so things don't tend to rust too fast. So it's definitely been out here for a good while, but this has got a little bit of pitting here. But overall, it's still in really good shape and it'll make for a great knife. You can tell it's a little bit older also because of this super coarse tooth pattern here. Not something you can really just go into the hardware store and pick up these days. Anyway, sometimes with these steels you can get lucky. If they're perfectly straight, you can keep the heat down and you don't even need to do a new heat treatment on them because they're already heat treated to be a knife. But unfortunately this one is pretty bent up, so I'm going to actually have to put this in the forge, straighten it out before I can make a knife out of it. That means I've got to do a new quench, and a lot of times working with steel this thin, when you go to quench it, it's going to warp dramatically. But I've got a few tricks up my sleeve that are going to help not have this thing get too warped out of the quench. So first step in all of my knife, and most of my knife making processes, is do a drawing. And you can tell that here I have a very simple outline of a fillet knife. Got my template cut out, and a lot of times I can get away with just using a Sharpie directly on the metal, but if the metal is not going to accept the Sharpie, I can go to spray paint. But let's see if this works. That's a perfect fit. I was wondering if my drawing was going to be a little bit too long, but doesn't get much better than that, does it? Alright, just a quick drawing. Doesn't have to be anything too precise, because I'm going to cut in here with an angle grinder and just cut off the excess. And then I'll grind it to final shape. I've got a used 40 grit on here. You never want to use a brand new belt when you're hogging out material like this, because this thin section here will just rip off your grit. Anyways, let's get this old thing fired up. So I got the grip exactly where I want it. It already feels pretty good in hand. The tip, because it's so bent up here, I don't want to finalize the actual form until it's all straightened out. So, to the forge. Let's get this forge lit up here. This thin little piece of metal heats up really fast, so we're already there. Like I said, I don't want it too hot. Just looking to straighten out the tip. Make sure it's all true. Check. thin stuff is hard to keep straight. Very hard. Alright, I got the blade almost straightened out, enough for what I need to do. Perfect. This metal is so thin and hard to keep straight while you're working with it. But that thinness is going to be exactly what you want in a fillet knife. Give it that incredible flexibility and slicing properties. Let this cool down, and then I've got some final shaping to do, and I gotta drill a few pinholes for the handle. So here's my final shape ground out, and you can already see it's got really good flexibility right where you want it. So now it's off to the drill press. Cut up a couple holes in here. This hole is just going to be a speed hole, lightning hole, because it doesn't really line up with where I want to put a pin. We'll put 3 in here, and then it's off to heat treat. Real slow. Next one. All she wrote. So this old steel has got a lot of character here, and I want to keep that. However, I am not going to do any sort of beveling pre-heat treat. It's all going to be post-heat treat. And so I want to get this to as much as final shape as possible, because I like to leave a little bit of a forge finish on the flats, because I'm not going to do a full flat grind on this. And so it's going to have to be dressed up right now. If I try to do any beveling pre-heat treat on this super thin steel, I just would never get it flat. So it's all going to be post-heat treat. I'm going to have to keep the temperatures really low, slow grind. But for right now, I'm going to come in here and just give off a little bit of final treat to this blade. You can see it's got a really sharp edge here. Going to take care of that. Get rid of some of this rust. Get it down to not bare steel. You'll see what it looks like. I got the grinder on real slow. We're just going to come in. I don't need to do too much down here because this is all going to get handle scale on it. So I'm not too worried about that. Just trying to take off some of this rust. There you go. So now I'm going to put on a finer grit belt because I'm going to touch up the spine and I don't want it to be a 40 grit finish. So this is a 240 belt, pretty fine. And we're going to touch up the spine all along here because after the heat treat I'm not going to be messing with that at all. And now it's got a little bit of an edge here, so I'm just going to take that off on the slack. So we got a little bit of slack here, and that's what I'm using. Just to radius that off so it's not such a sharp angle. Alright, that feels good. Got my oil nice and hot. I'm going to normalize this blade twice, trying to keep it as straight as possible. Then we'll give it a quench on its third heat. And I've got these quench plates. I'm going to sandwich it in. step on it, it should come out beautifully straight. Oh yeah, that is perfectly straight. We'll test hardness here. So here's a nice file. Absolutely doesn't touch it. You couldn't file that if you wanted to. This is perfect. So this fillet knife is fresh from the temper oven. You can see on here. Has a nice golden color. I've already cleaned up the handle a little bit. I'm going to use this slack part right here to freehand the bevels on this. We'll get a nice slight convex. I don't want anything too aggressive because I still want this to be a relatively high saber grind. It's not going to go full flat. Looking for about halfway down the stock right here. Try and keep the line straight. Going to keep this nice and cold. Keep dunking it in water. Blade blank on this is done. We have a sweet convex edge. Very nice rustic look going on with this metal from that old saw. Edge is very thin, ready to be sharpened, but we gotta work on the handle now. These are some very nice black walnut. It's got some sweet figuring. This is gonna look great on this blade. They're gonna be book matched here. And we are going to see how I want this to be. Just like that. Get these drilling. So now I'm going to put a pin in that spot and drill the other two spots so the alignment is all perfect. Now we just stack them together, drill through the same holes. The next step is to establish the top section of our handle scales, because once these are glued on, you will not be able to touch these up at all. You can, but it's going to be really difficult if you're going to have to go in there with sandpaper and not mess up any of the other finishes. So what we're going to do is I want to just mark right here. And I'll know to cut at that spot, terminate the handle scale. All this section will be cut off. And then on this side, I want it to come just a little bit higher. Probably about right here for now. So I'm going to cut this section right here of the handle scale. Now that I've got this profile to where I want it, this is sanded on the belt sander to 240. Got a piece of 400, and we'll just finish this off by hand. You can see I like that line right here. This is all finished. I've come with a pencil, marked out the outline of the actual handle here. We come on the bandsaw, remove some of this excess material, and then we'll get ready for epoxy. So right now this handle is really smooth. Before I epoxy the handle scales on, I like to give a little spot for the epoxy to really bite onto. So I've got a Dremel with an abrasive wheel, and we're just going to make some squigglies here. We don't want to squish all the epoxy out of these handle scales when we glue them up. To help that, I went to the drill press and I put a bunch of little divots inside. It just gives it a place for that epoxy to really grab a hold of. This process takes a long time. I usually don't film the whole thing because it's just a long and somewhat boring process. But this will be nice to see how the whole part is done. Probably end up speeding up a good portion of this because equal parts, mix it, slather, clamp it, let it sit. Glue's all dry. You really need to be careful heating up these pins. This brass will get really hot and it will undo all the glue. So go slow, alternate between each pin so you don't heat anything up. So this handle is coming along beautifully. See, I went with a slight Coke bottle profile. Gives you that swell for your palm. Lets your hand just lock in already. So I'm done using the belt grinder. Unfortunately, even though it's very fast, it doesn't do a great job at blending in and giving radiuses. So from here, it's all going to be the Dremel, and I've got this paper mandrel here. It's not going to focus on it. There it is. Anyways, it's got a slot in there for some sandpaper. I'm just going to go very lightly to blend these in. It goes a little bit faster than using your hand. And then, of course, you will have to finish with the hand sand. So we're going to do that right now. Very slow on this. Trying to blend in some of these squared off lines. So after about an hour and a half of hand sanding, we are done. We're down to 400 grit. That's how I like to take it. Gives it a nice satin finish. Now, this is going to be cutting fish, and while walnut is a hardwood, it is very porous. And you can kind of see all those little spots, speckles. Those are actually pores that are filled with sawdust at the moment. Now we want to seal all that up. I'm going to use a super glue finish. This is Star Bond. I've had good luck with that. I actually have an affiliate link. If you like a 10% discount code, check out the bottom. I'll link that. And then this is an accelerator to help it dry. If you don't use this, sometimes it can dry white. So, in fact, if you look on here, sometimes super glue will dry kind of that opaque. We don't want that on here. The accelerator will help mitigate that possibility. I'm going to spread this on with just my gloved finger. And then I'll go spritz. Probably not with the same finger. I have to use a different finger, otherwise it'll just stick to that. So, good thing to think of. So I'm just going to put this on. A couple drops. And then you'll see how the wood just absorbs it really, really fast. And then spritz. Light spritz. You know, kind of just work your way through. Just a little bit at a time. You don't need much. This wood absorbs it really fast. You don't want to get any high spots. A little spritz on there. We're just going to work that all the way through. Give it a nice hard finish. So this is after sanding with the 500 grit sandpaper. I actually found some 500. And so I just knocked off all the high spots, kind of give it a nice even finish again. And now we're going to go with a couple coats of BLO to seal it all up. Oh yeah, that's going to be awesome. Really nice. So I'm sharpening this fillet knife on the slack here. Now when I did my initial bevels, I almost took this to a 0 grind, so I'm not taking off much material. This is a 600 grit belt. I'll go to an 800, then a 1000 grit, and then I'll strop, and the edge on this will be done.